So today I'm delighted to be joined by James Gibbons from Capital One. James is head of legal for the UK in Capital One. He's been there for quite a long time now, James, haven't you? About 9 years.
Yep,
Thanks ever so much for taking some time to speak with me today. I
no problem.
appreciate it. So I guess one of the main reasons I wanted to speak to you, James, is because when we've met at Capital One, we've worked together briefly. I know you're involved in a project there at Capital One to look at how do you retain and promote brilliant women within Capital One to senior leadership positions. So I really wanted to get your perspective on that today. So would you like to tell me a little bit more about, what you're doing around trying to increase representation of women at Capital One?
Yeah, really happy to. And yeah, thanks for the invite to talk about it. So at Capital One, we're really proud of our focus and the work we do around diversity and inclusion. And we've got some good measures of it going well. So we are recently ranked in the Great Places to Work survey, one overall, but also for women. We're in the top 30, which we're really proud of. Also got some really good senior role models who are women. Like some of the top jobs, our CEO is a woman, and some really good measures of we are on a good course. But we also recognise that, along with many other organisations, as you go up the levels, that you look at the seniority in the organisation, the representation of women drops off. And that's a specific target and objective that we have within Capital One to increase representation of women in the senior roles. And one thing we're doing over the last 12 to 18 months, which I've had a big part in, is really trying to understand and address the key challenges, whether it's organisation or whether it's particularly focused on how women experience their route through their careers at Capital One. I really try and understand that. And I kind of played three roles in that. One is just as a senior leader within the organisation of just knowing deeply the impact of our focus on diversity, inclusion, and the representation of women. Just it's so important for the success of our business, but also the success of our associates. So just for the experience people have of working for Capital One and the success of the business, it's important. But I've also taken up a role over the last 2 years of a sponsor, director plus sponsor, as we call it, of one of our staff business resource groups. Different businesses call it different things, called Empower Her. And that's focused on empowering women to succeed. But we've also been more strategic in how we think about how we tackle the issue of increasing representation of women in senior roles. So taking time with all of the insight and work that we get externally, and have done workshops and surveys over the years to really try and understand the different things that we can do to increase progression, in particular women through the organisation. Maybe we'll touch on some of that, but certainly the menopause is an issue which has come out through that.
Yeah.
Then a final thing in terms of my role in it, which I think is slightly different, is being head of legal, as you mentioned. I'm really aware that the focus in financial services, the focus of our regulator is more and more on what companies are doing across diversity and inclusion. So it's becoming not just the right thing to do to focus on progression of women and other characteristics, but it's also becoming the expected thing. So kind of all of those things in the mix have given me a really interesting broad role in this topic.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When we talk about menopause awareness, we always touch upon the law, but for me, it's not what should be driving it. It's about doing the right thing and
Exactly.
harnessing the best of our people. Thanks for that. So I guess there are several themes that are coming out of that work you're doing. But if we think about menopause, how are you seeing that impacting your talent pipeline, or are you seeing that impacting your talent pipeline currently?
Yeah, so we know somewhat intuitively and anecdotally that it has an impact. And one of the reasons I say anecdotal is when we've spent the time speaking to associates who we call them associates at Capital One, staff or employees to others, spoke to people, and issues which are particularly impactful on women, such as menopause, come out as strongly as this is an area where there just needs to be more focus. And when we look at progression through the organisation, we can absolutely see that there must be factors which are preventing some women or some women being supported from progressing to the more senior roles. So the
Mm.
connection of us being told it by our associates, looking at the data, we know this is a topic we can really focus on and make a difference.
And I guess at this point in generally the typical woman going through menopause is 45 to 55, but we know that perimenopause could start a little bit earlier. So these folks are often in the sandwich generation, right? They could have challenging careers at Capital One, caring responsibilities for children, maybe for adults, parents as well. So menopause is something that I guess is a challenge on top of lots of other challenges, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I very aware that when one as a man, but also going through the journey of understanding this from the perspective of people in my team who may be going through it, people across the rest of the organization. It's absolutely a learning journey. And I don't claim to have any of the answers to how we solve for this or all the information I need. But certainly what's come through to me, including from work you and I have done together, Mel, and the sessions you do at Capital One, is just how impactful the menopause can be, not all the time, but can be on a woman's life, but particularly their career. And what's really clear is that without the space and opportunity to discuss the impact on the individual, and then some ways, particularly for leaders, to be able to act to support a woman going through it and dealing with the particular experience of it, there's going to be a really big impact on that stage in someone's life, but also their career. And it can often be a key part of their career, whether they do progress into the senior roles or not. So absolutely.
Yeah. And you've got some amazingly impressive women at Capital One who are at that point in their lives, right, who are very credible and very respected. And I guess it's thinking about how do we retain those people so that Capital One can be its best and those colleagues can flourish, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
So if we think about that from the menopause awareness stuff you said is important. So why do you think it's so important for leaders to have, really good, solid menopause awareness?
Yeah, so I have a strong view across everything we try and achieve culturally and organisationally as a business, that people, leaders or managers are the essential part of it, and because they just have such a massive impact on the way their teams feel, and also just the way culturally people are looking up the chain to do what their manager's manager is acting like and talking about. They have a really big impact on the culture. And so we ask a huge amount of people leaders and managers, and I felt that throughout my career, and I'm very aware of it still, that we ask a lot. So we've got to find ways of supporting managers and people leaders to step up to that. I think there's a couple of things there. One is just understanding why it's important, and this could be menopause, it could be other things. I think just assuming people leaders buy into and understand how it fits in the ecosystem of everything they're trying to work through is important. But
Yeah.
then opening up the ability to have just an open, vulnerable conversation about menopause or about other things where actually a people leader may not naturally want to step into that is so important. Because if the first time they're confronted with this issue is with one of their team who really needs some support, then that's just not fair on the people leader, and it's not going to lead to an effective conversation. So I
No.
think supporting people leaders to have the tools and have gone through the conversations and be able to learn and think about it is really important.
And you're right, it's such a difficult job being a people leader, right? It's a tall order. And I think it can be quite worrying to have this conversation. I think as well, one of the things I've seen at Capital One is the people leaders have come in and they go away feeling differently. And actually, one of the challenges we have is some of the women who are starting with perimenopause are not aware they're starting with it. So actually, I've heard leaders say, I actually can see some of this in one of my colleagues, and I don't think they're aware yet. So you say
Yeah.
their reach, their impact is huge, isn't it?
Absolutely. And just thinking about, as you're saying that, it can be a little bit daunting for a people leader. They almost have to go in, diagnose or understand this in their team. I don't think it's as much that as much as just being aware of it and asking good questions and helping someone see some of the challenges they might be facing, just trying to get them to also open up and discuss whatever the topic is, and particularly menopause, like whether that's affecting their ability or just the way they're showing up at work in a way that then the people leader can step in and support. And just while we're on people leaders, I think the other big impact of focusing on people leadership is just the massive ripple effect that you can get from a fairly small investment in terms of the amount of people who might go through a training course or speaking about it, and the ripple effect of them talking to their people leaders, if they manage people leaders, their teams. And I'm very much seeing that at Capital One over the last year in particular, as we've made this issue much more prominent. These discussions on menopause are just becoming more commonplace, and over time that must just compound and become much more of a natural thing as an organisation.
Do you see that cultural shift, and it is a shift because it takes time? Do you see that having any sort of practical implications yet, or I don't know.
It's probably too early for me to speculate on that, but I think unless you've talked about this, and I think it's true to talk about menopause having been a taboo to some extent, particularly in the workplace over the years, and we've lifted the lid on that. That feels. I think I can authentically say that doesn't feel true at Capital One anymore, that it's a taboo. Now, what that does is, one, facilitate good individual conversations, but it also gives us the insight as an organization, insight, like data points, knowledge to say, okay, well, that's where we could go in the future to provide more support or enable people leaders to have even better conversations. So I think we're in a place where we've made probably the hardest step, which is making it a discussion point. But I think now is the next stage of actually, with all of that great insight we get, what's the next stage after that?
Great. And I guess finally, I'd ask James, have you got any tips for people leaders trying to support colleagues navigating menopause currently?
Yeah, one, look for one of your courses. You haven't told me to say that.
Great tip. I like that one.
Yeah, yeah. But no, there's one thing I'd start with is always be authentic. I think if you are a people leader and you're trying to be an authentic, trying to read a script or a checklist of things to say, I think that people will see through that and quickly shut down. So one is that, and that might mean your authentic self is actually not to know a huge amount what to do. And in that situation, just ask questions and be open and listen. And it might be you need to go away and think about it, speak to your own manager, go and get some more information, whatever it is. That is a really important step. Don't try and close something down, be open. But as you feel more informed, I think it is all about being very human in the moment, empathizing if someone is struggling or is finding something hard, but then trying to work out, your role as people leader is to help that person to thrive, and work out, well, what is it that could be adjusted, often fairly simple things, to really help that person to thrive. And as I said, it doesn't have to be in that moment. It can be over a course of conversations over weeks or months. It doesn't need solving in the second, often it can't be. But I think having that frame is really important.
I think leaders are driven to get things solved and sorted. And we have that conversation in the classrooms at Capital One. This is about using our ears more than our mouths, like you say, asking the right questions and being there and being open.
Yeah.
So, oh, thanks ever so much, James. I really appreciate you taking some time to share your perspective today. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.